Hello everyone, thanks for joining me, New South Wales DPI's Soils Development Officer, Abby Jenkins, and Matt Leschke from the LLS for our October 2020 Soils Network of Knowledge webinar. Susan Orgel, one of our soil unit researchers, has suggested that Matt would be a good speaker for SNOT because of the work he's doing with this farm forecaster and the establishment of the soil moisture probe network across southeastern New South Wales. So Matt was raised on a wheat sheep property in the Riverina of New South Wales, and since graduating from Charles Sturt University with a Bachelor of Agriculture, he's worked on a number of public and private sector roles and joined the local land services in 2013, where he's the Senior Agriculture Advisor in that Goulburn area. In this position, Matt's been involved in the development and delivery of a range of courses and extension programs covering grazing management, soil fertility, weaner performance, and beef marketing. So I'd like to welcome Matt, and we'll get on with it.
Well, good morning, everyone, and yeah, thanks, Abby, for the invitation to talk this morning on Farming Forecaster and to be part of the series. So my talk today will consist of three parts. What is Farming Forecaster? So, what is it? Where can you access it? And what are the key components? And with Farming Forecaster, I guess the key components really is soil moisture and pasture forecast. So I thought I'd then sort of drill in and spend a little bit of time talking about soil moisture. So how is it measured and displayed? And how does it aid decision making, and then finishing off with looking at the pasture forecast side of the tool and how we are using historical weather data to look into the future. So what is Farming Forecaster? So it's specifically a decision support tool for graziers, and importantly, Farming Forecaster brings key information in a single location, being soil moisture, weather, pasture production, and livestock performance. The data is real time. So for the first time, graziers can see how daily changes in weather affect both soil moisture and future pasture production and availability. And it's also a risk management tool. So Farming Forecaster essentially provides a roadmap of pasture growth and livestock performance over the coming months ahead. And as a manager or an advisor, the earlier that you can detect the direction that things are likely to head in, the better position that you'll be in to manage the production system and minimize risk. And that risk could be both economic risk, but also environmental risk. So to view the tool, the web address is up in the top left-hand corner in big red font. So it's farmingforecaster.com.au, and the tool is a web-based application. So you access Farming Forecaster through your internet browser, but importantly, it's also been the website's been designed for optimal viewing on mobile devices as well, such as your smartphones and tablets, which is quite a big improvement on its predecessor website. The other thing to note is that if you do go to this website using a smartphone or a tablet, you will notice that there will be a little pop-up message which asks you if you'd like to create a shortcut to your home screen, and by clicking on that, it essentially puts a little icon on your home screen so you can launch it just like an app. So here we're looking at a screenshot of the Farming Forecaster homepage. This is what you'll see when you first go there, and essentially the Farming Forecaster homepage can be divided up into four parts. So we have the probe information on the top left-hand corner, pasture forecasts top right-hand corner, and then when you scroll down the page, there's the other two parts being the weather forecast. So that's a local weather forecast, depending on what location you've selected. and there's also a member update section. And you don't need to be a member to access that information. It's basically an information hub with various bits of relevant information there. And we've just actually uploaded a little while ago some videos, some instructional videos on Farming Forecaster, and how to navigate your way around and how to really read and interpret a lot of the graphs and the outputs. So if you'd like to learn more about the tool, then that might be something that you can check out in your own time. So soil moisture. So that's a bit of an introduction. Moving on to soil moisture, how are we actually measuring it and displaying that information, and how does it aid in decision making? So as mentioned, the soil moisture data is all sitting in that top right-hand corner of the homepage under the probe heading, and this is where real-time measurements from the field are being displayed. So being soil moisture, so we can see under the probe heading, soil moisture, and we have some readings here at different depths down into the soil profile, and we'll sort of look at that a bit further in a moment. So some soil moisture readings there, and we're also displaying soil temperature at 10 centimeters and rainfall as well. And there's a couple of buttons down the bottom. There's the View Network button and more probe details. And so those buttons then sort of take you into another area of the website where you can view further information. Before I move on, I'll just mention that there's a drop-down list over here. So on the website, you can use that list to select a location of interest. At the moment, there's about 30 different locations that are part of the tool. So that's the drop-down list that you use to select which site you'd like to look at. So if you click on that View Network map button down the bottom, that will actually bring up a page that looks like this. So now we're now looking at a map of sort of showing where all the moisture probes are located across the southeast region. And so those coloured pins on the map are indicating geographically where the probes are located in the landscape, and they extend from Bigger, for those that know the local sort of area in the tablelands, Bigger in the north, right down through around that Goulburn Crookwell area. And then we also have a network of probes sort of down around Cooma and further south on the Monaro. So there's 27 probes installed across the region in total, and the probes that we have used are the 1 metre capacitance probes that measure soil moisture and temperature at various depths down the profile, being measurements taken at 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, and a metre. And so those measurements are being collected, and we also measure rainfall at each of these sites, and that's done automatically using a rainfall bucket with a 0.2 millimetre tipping sensor. So this slide shows how the information is collected in the field and then transferred and displayed on Farming Forecaster. So data is sent from the paddock, and we are measuring every hour. We are measuring and logging soil moisture, soil temperature, and rainfall. And so every hour, that information from the field is sent via the 4G network to a telemetry provider. In our case, we use Mate Industries, which is a company based in Victoria. And so the data sent to Mate, and then from that point, Data Farmer, which is a program that's been developed by Square V, Data Farmer pulls that information every 10 minutes from Mate, and then instantaneously then populates Farming Forecaster. So while there are a couple of steps there, that actually all happens quite quickly and seamlessly. And so effectively we are getting real-time soil moisture or real-time information from the field being displayed. when developing Farming Forecaster and its predecessor website, one of the main objectives was to develop an interface that is easy to read, understand, and interpret the data. And so the first screenshot there that you're looking at is from the Mate website. So that's an example of the standard sort of data interface or output that you get when you install a moisture probe. And so when we were really keen to try and I guess improve the readability of that information. And so the graph underneath is from Farming Forecaster, and it's exactly the same information from the same site, but it's just presented in a slightly different way. So we're using a stacked graph now, and the thickness of the bands indicate the amount of moisture at various depths down the profile. And so for this site, like a lot of areas across the state, yeah, has had an exceptional year, and we can see this really sort of big increase in soil moisture at the beginning of March. And then one of the features this year is not just being the amount of moisture or rainfall, but the timing has just been spot on. And we can see through autumn this gradual sort of building up of soil moisture to a point where this site and a lot of sites locally reach sort of field capacity or saturation point during winter. And then we can see now, as we head into spring, this rapid drawdown of moisture by the pasture as temperatures have warmed up. And the graph is also showing, unfortunately, we had quite a dry start to September, so you can see how it's really quickly sort of chewed into that soil moisture. And then there's about sort of 15 or maybe 20 mils of rain actually mid-September, and you can sort of see how that 20 mil rain event just sort of helped stabilize things a bit and arrested that rapid decline. So that screenshot there, the stack graph is showing soil moisture sort of dynamics over time. And the other thing that we've done on Farming Forecaster, and you would have seen us on the homepage, is we also show or display current soil moisture readings on a percentage basis. So those readings there are current readings, and we also show beside it how today's reading compares with various points in time. So how does the overall moisture in the top 60 centimetres compare to this time last week, this time last month, and also year on year. The other thing I'll just mention before I move on is the Farming Forecaster website can be used as an interface to read any existing probes or new probes that go in, as long as the telemetry provider is happy to pass that information on. The other thing, when developing our own website, it enabled us to customize it, and importantly, from a source perspective, it enabled us to put some really, I think, valuable information or background information around each site. So for each of the probe sites, we have some really good information around the soil that we're actually dealing with, and all of the sites have been sort of characterized by the same person, so we've got some consistency there. And so when you go into Farming Forecaster, for each site, you'll be able to see some photos of the profile, and also importantly how soil texture changes with depth, and we've got the different horizons there as well. And that information is really important because it helps put the soil moisture readings into some sort of context. So how does soil moisture information aid in decision making? The major benefit of measuring soil moisture is it gives us an indication of how much moisture we have of the system at any point in time. Is the bucket full? Is it half full? Is it almost empty? Having some understanding of current moisture increases confidence with decision making at critical stages of the season. And I've highlighted the word confidence there because I think that really is the key word. Confidence enables us to make decisions earlier. If, as humans, if we're uncertain about something, we are more likely to delay the decision or not act at all. So it's increasing our confidence levels. To demonstrate this a little bit, I've pulled up some screenshots here of I guess how things were positioned this time, or roughly this time last year. And this was the scenario that our region and a lot of areas broadly were faced with coming out of winter last year. Now, we didn't need a network of probes to tell us that it was dry. We all knew it was dry, but how dry was it? You know, how much moisture did we actually have in the system? Where was it sitting? And also, how much moisture did we have going into spring 2019 compared to the previous year? Because we all knew that locally that 2018 was a real bobtail spring. And so, yeah, how were we sort of positioned, relative speaking, compared to the previous year? So in the top corner here, this is actually a screenshot from the old website, which is why the graphics look a little bit different. But for this particular site, you know, it was, and this is quite common across our area. Going into spring last year, we had a little bit of quite good moisture in the top 10 centimetres, but below that it was very dry. And you can see here, once you got below that sort of or into the 40 centimetre layer, it was virtually bone dry. So no real subsoil moisture at all, which was a really big concern. And the other big concern in terms of soil moisture was this field gauge here was showing us, or indicating that we were actually in a worse position compared to 2018 at the same point in time. So the field gauge, the red needle was indicating, was showing us our current position, and the green needle was showing us where we were at the same time 2018. So that was a real cause of concern for growers locally. And talking to producers over the last couple of years, they've often commented that they find one of the most valuable things on this on our website and Farming Forecaster was just that relative measurement, to be able to see how soil moisture is sitting compared to this time last year. So that was the situation in terms of soil moisture going into spring. And the other concern was, as you can see down the bottom there, we had, you know, low soil moisture, but also a very negative spring outlook. So the warning bells were certainly going off. Unfortunately, as predicted, this site had well below average rainfall, and pastures dried up and were gone by early October. So it went down as one of the toughest springs on record. So this slide is here sort of saying, well, what about if this was the scenario? So we still have a very dry outlook for spring, but what if 12 months ago we were looking at the probe network and we could see that soil moisture was actually sitting in a very good position and well above average. So in that case, you know, the good soil moisture, if this was the case, the soil moisture would have been providing a real buffer heading into spring and just buying us a little bit more time. So if this was the scenario last year, it might have been more of a case of, yes, the bomb outlook's looking pretty ordinary, but we know that we've actually got quite a bit of soil in the bank, soil moisture in the bank, and so therefore, you know, you might be willing to, willing to sort of suck it and see for the next couple of weeks and just sort of see how the first half of September plays out. So just giving it a little bit more time. So soil moisture data is really providing an extra piece of information. We're not just reacting to a weather forecast. Which now brings me on to the pasture forecast part of farming forecast. So this is where we're using historical weather data to look into the future. So prior to farming forecaster, we had a website where we were displaying the soil moisture for those locations, but we had to manually run the grass growing model for each probe site and produce a pasture forecast manually in Excel, and then that report was then emailed out locally twice a year, so autumn and spring. And because we had to manually run the grass grow model for all of the 28 or so locations, it was quite a labor intensive exercise, and so that's why we limited it to twice a year. But the feedback from producers was that they really valued the information, but they wanted to have it on a more regular basis. So the big advancement with farming forecaster was that now, with funding through the National Landcare Program, we've been able to work quite closely with CSIRO, and to a point now where the grass growing model and the pasture forecasts are automatically run and produced and integrated into the website. So the pasture forecasts now sit right alongside the soil moisture information, and the pasture forecasts are updated on a monthly basis. And we also have a black tracking worm, which you can see here in this graph. So the pasture forecasts are produced at the start of each month, and then we have this black tracking worm, which shows us how the pasture availability is actually progressing through that forecast period. So now, rather than getting these physical reports emailed out twice a year, producers have this information essentially on tap. So the other thing to note, just while we're on this screen here, is that the probe data, which is on the left, and the pasture forecast data are completely independent of each other. The probe data is measurements, or the probe data is data coming directly out of the paddock and field measurements, whereas the pasture forecast is simulated data produced by GrassGrow. So what is GrassGrow? For those of you who may not be familiar with it, it's a decision support tool that simulates pasture and animal production using a whole farm modelling approach. And it was a program developed by CSIRO back in the 1990s. And so within GrassGrow, farm systems have been custom built for each of the probe locations, where we use local pasture mixes or pasture species. We use local soil information, and then once we do that, we then select a representative livestock enterprise and stocking rate. And then GrassGrow also uses or needs weather / sort of climate data to run, and in this case, the data is provided, or the climate data is provided via silo, so it's gridded data, and it's 30 years of gridded data that we use. So to produce the forecast for each site, GrassGrow uses the historical weather data from silo, and it runs. So the model is run, and it's run along until till today's date, or the start of the forecast period. So it's spun up to the start of the forecast period, and then based on the starting conditions, the model looks at soil moisture, pasture availability, livestock condition, what stage of production those livestock are in. It takes all those factors into account, and then based on those starting conditions, the model uses the most recent 30 years of weather data for that location to simulate the next 4 months ahead. So what it does is it goes, if the forecast is from the 1st of September, which is this example here, if we're at the 1st of September looking forward, the model is spun up to the 1st of September, and then it goes back and grabs the weather data from 1990 for that forecast period, from the 1st of September through till the end of December. Grabs the weather data from 1990 and does a run and see and models how that plays out. The model then grabs the same weather data for the same period for 1991 and models that. And so it goes through and models the outcome for the last 30 years. And that's what we call a tactical run. So rather than presenting the end result, so you end up with 30 lines or 30 possible outcomes based on the last 30 years. And rather than presenting 30 lines to say this is historically this is what you could expect to see, which would be pretty messy and hard to interpret, we present the results as percentiles. So by default in Farming Forecaster, the percentiles that are selected are the 90th percentile, 50th percentile, and 10th percentile. So the red and the blue lines provide an indication of the likely range in pasture availability under both really, really good growing conditions, being the blue line, the 90th percentile, or a very dry scenario, which would be the 10th percentile. And the yellow line is the median of those outcomes. So the yellow line is what you could expect to see if average growing conditions eventuated during that forecast period. The shaded area in the background there, that is actually the historical pasture range, which is also presented in percentiles for that site. And importantly, the historical information there in the shaded areas gives us a reference point to compare against. So here we are looking at a pasture forecast for one of the Monero sites, and unfortunately the Monero missed out on the really good autumn rainfall earlier in the year, and went through and because of that went through a really tough and difficult winter. And so that's why you can see here that the starting point for the pasture forecast coming out of winter was really low, well below average, and it was sitting around that sort of 25th percentile level. So very, very low levels of starting herbage mass. But the Monero actually picked up some really good rainfall in late winter. And so when Grassgrow went to do a pasture forecast from the start of September for spring, even though the pasture levels are very low, the good soil moisture that fell in July, August meant that those lines, the projections started to sort of look or trend in a more favourable direction. So, and the black line there is showing, how pasture growth is actually, how the models, shows how it's actually tracked through that period. And so that really good soil moisture that we had coming out of winter led to really good growing conditions for the first half of September. But then unfortunately, this site's received very little September rainfall. So things have dried, the soil's dried out a bit. And we can see that effect where the black lines just really started to bend over and plateau there. So it'll be really, this site really does need some rain in the next week to really try and kick that black line back up and try and get pasture levels back up to somewhere near, that sort of, 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare territory, which will certainly help from a livestock point of view. So that's a bit of an example of a pasture forecast, and these forecasts are updated at the start of each month. So this particular pasture, or all the pasture forecasts, will be updated in the next day or so. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the updated version of this forecast looks like for this site. So that's brings me to the end. If you'd like to know further, if you'd like to find out more about the project, we have a great project officer in Andrea Mitchell. I've put Andrea's contact details up there for you, and yeah, if you'd like to know more, please feel free to get in touch with Andrea. And I'd also just like to conclude by saying that that this project has been a real collaboration between local land services and two local farming systems groups, so being Monero Farming Systems and Tablelands Farming Systems. And I'd also like to acknowledge the funding through the Australian Government's National Landcare Program, which has really made this whole project possible, and building and developing Farming Forecaster. And I'd also like to acknowledge Square V and CSIRO for their involvement in the project as well. So thanks, Abby. I'll leave it at that. And
thank you very much, Matt. That was great, and it's always really nice to see how you know, technology can be put together to help give the farmers and the land managers real-time information that can help them make better decisions. So, and it's also great to see a project that's a real collaboration between research and advisory and extension and stuff like that. So thank you, and thanks everyone for attending.
no worries, thank you.